Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for Tuesday Takeovers for Racial and Social Justice. Today we'll be talking about what is SOJI. Before we begin, I have the honor to recognize the lands and the Native people in California. Let this be the time we think of those people who walked and worked this land long before we did, and their endurance through murderous laws that started in our state. Let this be the time you start to understand the long-standing history that the Tongva and hundreds of California Native people have and continue to walk through. And let this be our time to know these lands and people of yesterday and today. So what is SOJI? You've probably heard this, and for many decades ago, it was not a word that anyone ever used because it was considered derogatory. And now today, and many years later, it's no longer that way. So SOGI, sexual orientation and gender identity. So we all have a sexual orientation, whether we're heterosexual, homosexual, or somewhere in between. And we all have a gender identity that can be male, female, or many other genders on the spectrum. Some say up to 27, some say 58 different genders. So today we have four wonderful panelists who are going to share their stories with us today. And they are all on that very wide spectrum of what is SOJI. So we have Mel House, Andrea Reyna, Robin Nixon, and David Avila. So we'll start off with our first question, which I understand in our preliminary talks today is probably the most important. So I would like them each to introduce themselves and tell us your story. How do you identify? When and how did you come out? And we'll start with Mel.
Thank you, Scott. Hi, everybody. Glad you're all here. Yeah, so what the heck happened for me to be sitting here tonight? Well, it was a warm, humid night in Michigan in 1974, and yeah, no, I pretty much knew I was different when I was probably 3 or 4 years old, but just didn't have the vocabulary to put it into words. I first came out to myself as gay because that was a vocabulary word that fit how I felt at the time. And the first time that I ever had any exposure to gay people was actually an episode of The Donahue Show and watching Phil Donahue interview two men who were together sometime in the mid 80s. And so I finally had a vocabulary word that I could use to kind of explain myself to myself. Um, and I didn't come out publicly until the end of college. I just tried really, really hard to be straight, like so many of us do and did back then, at any rate. But just, I had a lot of guys who were boyfriends. We were really, really, really good friends, but just nothing ever happened beyond being good friends. But I tried really, really hard because, again, there were just no role models growing up, and being gay was not in Michigan in the 80s and 90s. It wasn't anything that was hugely widely accepted, and it just really still was not okay. I finally came out in between my bachelor's degree and my teaching certification, the summer between those 2 years of college. And it was like this entire weight lifted off of my shoulders. But then going through years of life and dating women and being in the LGBTQ plus scene, my orientation is I am attracted to women, whether cis or otherwise. But those who present as women is my sexual orientation, which is different than my gender, which is non-binary. So, but one thing that always struck me too is like the use of the word lesbian. I've always hated that word personally. I feel like it sounds like a medical diagnosis. We just are who we are and we love who we love, and so I've always better identified with the word queer. Um, and then I moved out to California when I was 27 years old. I'm gonna be 47 this summer, so yeah, I've been out here almost 20 years. And after being in California for a while and working and living in a place where being gay was just way, way more mainstream, it was just amazing to just walk through the world as me and not really having to explain or justify myself anywhere I went. And being part of CTA obviously has kind of helped and broadened that horizon as well, because fortunately, you know, sometimes you don't realize how fortunate you are living in California until you spend copious amounts of time in a state that's not California, and realize actually how privileged we are here, with the legal protections that we have and whatnot. But coming out as non-binary, it's like, you know, I had to come out twice. Came out as gay in my 20s, came out as non-binary, actually not until my early 40s. But just making a lot of observations with other self-identified lesbians, looking at belonging to Facebook groups and seeing pictures of, you know, two self-identified women getting married but wearing dresses, or one's wearing a tux and one's wearing a dress, but yet even the one wearing a tux is still doing things that are what I would consider as part of the female binary, or people that self-identified butch, but yet when a special occasion comes up, showing up somewhere in what society would call feminine attire, or wearing earrings and makeup, and I'm just like, that's not me. It's just not me. So coming out as, you know, the overarching term is transgender, and non-binary falls into the overarching transgender umbrella, and that's where I see myself. That I think that if being supported as transgender would have been a thing when I was an elementary school kid back in Michigan, and public schools would have been supportive of that when I was younger, I probably would have transitioned. But for me, not transitioning is as much of a choice, um, as it ever could be, just because for me personally, I've lived my whole life with, um, you know, it's a struggle to walk through the world as an LGBTQ person, and it's a struggle to walk through the world as a non-binary person. And I feel like that for myself, with all the politics going on right now, honestly the last thing, no offense, Scott, but the last thing that I would want to identify as in the world right now is a white male. I just don't really feel like being part of the gentry. Also, in my own personal walk through this world on my racial justice journey, and where I am in that journey. And then because I'm already misgendered a lot, I feel too like, transitioning for me would probably mean I would be fully passable. And then I just wonder to myself what my life would be like if I didn't have as much struggle, because who I am is because of my struggle. So when people ask if you really feel like you're trans, then why don't you transition? And there are several, you know, that's pretty much why right now. That's not how I feel. I feel like I'd rather walk the world as a non-binary human, and basically force the conversation with people that may not know what non-binary means, right? Like, I am who I am, and who I'm about is more important than me fitting in somebody else's box. So yeah, that's me. I don't know if that was more than you wanted to hear or not, but there we are. So.
All right. Thank you, Mel. And I totally understand the white male vision there, because I don't identify that way, even though that's how I look. Andrea, same question. Introduce yourself and how do you identify, and when and how did you come out?
Hey everyone, my name is Andrea Reina and I use feminine and non-binary pronouns. I identify as a Chicana who is queer and pansexual. To quote David Rose from one of my favorite shows, Schitt's Creek, I love wine, but not the labels, and I utterly loathe binaries. I've struggled with gender since I was a kid. I was faced with constant pressure to conform to gender norms, and I have these very, very vivid memories of just like puberty and transitions just being completely traumatic for me. And just anytime I would just try to be myself, family would just squash that. I never grew up having a desire to play with dolls or toys in that manner. I wanted to play sports and do all kinds of other things. I wanted to learn boxing from my daddy, but that was never allowed because I'm a girl. That all these different things I wanted to do that were off the menu for me just because of how I was born. And I always felt like my life was extremely constricted and limited because of this. And probably for a lot of those reasons, it's been hard for me to have my journey and to come out. I tiptoed into it when I was living in Serbia, which at that point was not a country where one could be openly queer in. You literally had to know which alleyway to walk down and which semi-closed fence to go under to get into queer spaces. And in fact, it really wasn't until my daddy passed away in my late 20s that I really felt that I could begin my journey in earnest. And the strangest way that that began was through my hair. As a Latina, I was not allowed to cut my hair the way I wanted to. I left the country to cut my hair shorter. And then it was, tacitly implied that, oh, okay, you're not trying to be chic in Europe anymore. You better let it grow out. And I feel so sad that my daddy never got to appreciate me or I feel accept me in the way that I would have wanted him to accept me. And it's even still kind of like fighting against the gender norms and expectations, like folks always pressuring me to have a kid. I'm like, no, no. At this point, I'm like, I'm kind of getting a little too old for that, but also stay out of my uterus, stay out of my bits. I'm living my life the way that I want to live it. And you know what? I'm happy for that. I'm happy to be out. I'm happy to be that model for my students, and I'm happy to live my life on my own terms.
Thank you, Andrea. And at some point during this next hour, I'm going to put you on the spot. I would like you to, if I can put you on the spot, to try to give us a description or a difference between pansexual and bisexual. I'll give you, do you want to do it now or do you want to come back and think about it? Because I know a lot of people have that question.
I'm happy to go ahead and do that right now. So the way I interpret someone who identifies as bisexual is someone who is romantically attracted to someone who identifies as male or as someone who identifies as female. And someone who is pansexual doesn't feel the need to limit themselves to a strict gender binary. For me, it's hearts, not parts.
Perfect. Thank you so much. All right, Robin, if you would introduce yourself and tell us how do you identify and how did you and when did you come out?
Okay, hi everybody. I'm Robin Nixon. I'm a married lesbian, 60 years old, so I'm probably one of the oldest people here on the panel. I've been partnered married for about 33 years at this point. Heads up, I was born biologically male, but I was raised the fourth kid of the youngest child of four kids in a military family. But I always felt female and felt different from those around me. And I grew up really hard disguising how I felt, who I was, and all that. But I was a prodigious reader. And so as soon as I could, I began researching the way I was. I intellectualized it because I'd withdrawn so much into myself. And I'd go research in the libraries about anything that was going on that could be related to me, what was wrong with me. And eventually what I did realize, it wasn't a simple issue of whether I was gay or whether I was a transvestite or whether I was someone who wanted to simply wear women's clothing for sexual reasons or something like that, or as a means to attract men. I worked hard to fight those, change and fighting those feelings. I dated all through, well, actually, I was pretty asexual during high school, but I did date in college. Actually got into some long-term relationships with some women and stuff like that. Threw everything away that I could to hide what I was doing and who I was. I actually joined the military, kind of hyper masculinized for a little while. I went to Army jump school and jumped out of perfectly good airplanes, as my brother and my dad would laugh at me about. I went into software aerospace engineering, which is a very male-dominated field. But at the same time, I also began reaching out and connecting with several support groups in my region. And a thing called CompuServe had come online. This was kind of pre-internet. And I found support groups of other people that were on there and started talking with those. And it was funny, whenever you go to a lot of these support groups, it felt like going to an Alcoholics Anonymous group. Everybody's going, "Oh, I'm so sad. And, I got a sad story," and all that. And I was just happy to find other people and start to come out. I was scared about what was going on, because what could happen if I was doing, but I needed to move on. I approached my 25th birthday, and that's actually whenever things really busted out. I was a quarter of a century into my life, and I hadn't reached my goals and all that. So I felt it was time to act. So at that time, I reached out to doctors, counselors, and stuff like that, joined transition support groups, and went to several clinics to be analyzed, because that was the thing you did back in the 1980s. You had to go through some strict programs. And if you didn't fit the stereotype of what they were and act how they were told you to do, these gatekeepers would stop you and, deny you treatments and deny you counseling. And it was a horrible time for a lot of my friends. And I was able to get through a lot of those gatekeepers. I was turned away at some places, but I found a supportive group. I came out at work, and then right in the middle of that transition, I moved to California, because I knew I was living in Ohio at the time, and Ohio is a lot scarier place than California is. And as my brother would laugh about it, California was the part of the nation. They turned it on the sideways, shook it, and all the fruits, nuts, and flakes drifted down and formed California. And I was happy to come here. I'll be honest. I found a supportive community. I found supportive doctors, found supportive work environments, stuff like that. One of the things that was kind of surprising, aerospace was a very supportive environment for a lot of people going through transitions at those times. I met my spouse actually through my online support group, and actually first I moved close to California to be close to her, and then a year later, when I changed jobs, I moved in with her, and that was the beginning of our 33-year relationship. As time went on, we became domestic partners when that became legal, and then we eventually became married when we were able to be legally married. It was kind of interesting to go through. I could have cheated the system, because Ohio is one of those states that never allowed me to change my birth certificate. I had to go through other routes to try to document who I was and all that, through passport, through driver's license and stuff like that. But my birth certificate can never be changed. That just changed this month, actually, in Ohio, one of the last 2 states to finally change on that. That's kind of empowering. I went totally out in the community when I came out to California. I was part of the second Pride organizing committee for Orange County, for the Orange County Cultural Pride, the Pride Committee back in the 1980s. I moved on to Christopher Street West and worked on their board of directors and helped organize their festival and parade. Tara was a part of a women's band, and we used to go to women's music festivals here in California. And that was my first exposure to TERFs. I don't know if anybody's ever heard about them before. Trans exclusionary radical feminist, very anti-women's group, and felt their antagonism a bit. I moved from computer networking to education in the 90s, and I've worked from all aspects of education, from classified staff, campus supervisor, to a college lecturer, to a high school math teacher now. And all that time, I came from a union family, so I jumped into union activism, and I was really thrilled at CTA's embracement of our LGBTQ community and what we're doing. So I've always felt that I needed to give back on there. So that's why I've been active in there as state council rep, NEARA rep, local chapter officer, SOJI co-chair, LGBTQ issues planning committee, and all that stuff. It's kind of interesting. There's some, I got to see a lot of bad along the way. 70s was not a good time to grow up. In Alabama, when I was there, I was in high school. We had somebody who was a transgender girl in my classroom, and she was picked on incessantly. They would take thumbtacks and put her on a chair and torture her and call her names and just torture her there. I saw gay hatred. I was at a Boy Scout campus, camp counselor between junior and senior high schools. And one of the camp counselors was accused of being a gay male. And he was the closest I've seen to a lynching. They did horrible, hateful, hate crime things to this young man, and I witnessed it. And all that scared me to death about coming out in a large part of the United States, coming out in Ohio, coming out in Alabama. Those are places I can't imagine people, surviving in a lot of ways. But I hear that's, are still happening. Other discrimination I see within the educational establishment in California. When I was going for my student teaching, I had worked as a campus supervisor on a campus. I knew the administrator, thought I had a great relationship, and my advisor at the college had got me a spot to student teach back at that campus, and said, you need to report there such and such time. I called up the assistant principal who was in charge and said, hey, Frank, I don't remember his name. I said, I understand I'm supposed to report there. What day do you want me to zero in and all that? And he said, we've canceled student teaching this quarter. He canceled student teaching rather than having me on his campus as one of the student teachers. I realize I'm someone, I will always stand out. I'm 6'2" tall. I tower. I recognize people by the top of their heads. I look over cubicle walls. And one of the jokes somebody always asks, well, how tall are you? And women are never 6 foot tall. So I always tell them the joke, I'm 5'14". But I've been really happy about the progress we've made. I look at working with my kids now. Two sessions ago, 2 years ago, I had 5 trans boys go through my school. And I've been really proud of my district about how well they've worked with me and stuff like that, and how well they worked with my students now. So we're making progress, and I want to see us continue to make progress.
Thanks, Robin. That's we'll hear from David, and then get into more of what you were talking about. You're muted, my friend.
Yeah, I am muted myself. Okay. Hello, my name is David Avila. I'm a 50-year-old gay man. I identify as male, gay, and I'm the youngest of 5 in a single-family Mexican non-practicing Catholic home. Live in a very small town in Imperial County, which is very conservative. I always knew I was attracted to males, but knew I wasn't supposed to. At least that's how I felt. I was very social at school and high school. And, I went through through the motions of acting male as how I envisioned it in my head. I had 3 relationships, 3 years each with females. Just never had an emotional attachment. Wonderful people, wonderful families. And when it was time for me to move on to college, I thought, oh, well, okay, it's excellent, the perfect time. And same thing, there was something completely missing. So I think, like a lot of closeted individuals, I started living in two worlds. I started living in the straight world and in the gay world, and I didn't want my worlds to mix. I made sure that I had different sets of friends. And again, all of that I thought was the next step of, growing up like this. And it was driving me crazy. My mind, the things that I was thinking of doing, it wasn't very healthy. So once I graduated college, I decided, you know what, I'm going to go travel Europe. I'm going to give, sorry about that. I'm going to give myself an opportunity to be gay, if that's how I want to be. And so I made a pact with myself that I was going to travel and introduce myself as a gay man and experience life as a gay man and make friends as a gay man, not straight. I was going there to see what doors that would open for me. I ended up in Spain, met someone. I was there for 3 days, ended up staying a year, and this person broke my heart. Um, it was very, very difficult for me, but I felt alive for the first time ever. I thank him. I thank that person for making me feel human. Um, so when I left, I needed to share that. I needed to share that with my family, my friends, and I couldn't do that by lying. I needed to come out. I wanted to come out. It was the perfect time for me to do it. I did it. Instead of turning a really bad situation, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. Um, I had emotions, I had feelings. I was not lying to anyone anymore. That weight that I had been carrying on for years was gone. I started having better relationships with males because I was honest. I was honest. I didn't have two worlds that I was living in. I was opening up, and I had, a 7-year relationship, and then I had a 12-year relationship with my partners, and um, I've now been married a year with the love of my life, and I know it's because I'm able to express myself. I'm able to share honestly what I'm feeling, and I think that to me was the most important thing. Um, and well, that's my story.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I understand that now we're on Tissue Tuesdays because everyone had very, very emotional stories. Trying not to cry as your moderator. That usually happens at some point. So I'm going to move down to another question for you and just give it a few seconds. It takes us all a long time to figure ourselves out, which you all gave a very rich history, a personal history of doing that. As educators and identity role models, how do you support students' identity struggles and challenges? And let me remind you, challenges don't have to be negative. They can be positive, and hopefully they are. So let's start with Andrea, if that's okay.
Of course. So I like to think of there's many different ways and layers that we can support students who are, figuring out their identity. I'm an 8th grade teacher, and one of the ways that I layer support is encouraging staff members who are out or who are allies to have basic messaging around their classrooms that show that they are a supportive and safe person for students to come to. Also, being out does a lot of good. And this past year, over our pandemic teaching, just having a norm for at least all the adults on campus to have their pronouns made it so much more welcoming and easier for students to talk to us. Other things that I do to support kiddos and kind of sussing out who they are is to have explicit lessons on identity. One of the sources that I use for that is a book called This Book is Anti-Racist. And having explicit social emotional learning, a resource that I highly recommend, comes from Dr. Dina Simmons. And she has an organization called Liberated Cell, which you can find on Instagram and on Twitter. But also teaching concepts such as intersectionality and supporting students in unpacking their whole selves and recognizing other folks who are LGBTQ plus within our classes, and making sure that we are adhering to the FAIR Act, which means that we are being fully inclusive of folks who are LGBTQ plus in our curriculum and in our everyday teaching. All of that just kind of has a welcome hug effect on students. And even during a year of distance learning, students have felt safe and secure in coming out in various different ways.
Thank you. David, are you ready?
Yeah. For me, I teach in a very small, the population is 5,000. It's a very conservative area. And I'm surprised as to how open students are about talking about their sexuality, about their roles. And that to me is just uh, amazing. It's amazing to me. And so I just try to create a space where in my classroom where they can freely talk about that as long as they're not disrespecting anyone. I'm always constantly, they know that in my classroom, we treat every single person with respect, whether race, gender, whatever it is, it's with respect. When students have um, opened up about, or that I know that they are going to transitions, or they identify, as gay uh, or lesbian or something else, I I see them kind of down. I just really make it a point to, hey, hello, because sometimes to me, always was that hello goes a long way. So I guess I could keep an eye out more for these students. Because to me, I look back and I'm thinking like that's all I needed. I needed that one person just to acknowledge that I existed. So that's more of my role that I like to take at school with my students.
Thank you. Robin.
Well, I think with my campus and district has been training, training, training. I've taken advantage of the CTA training at the Human and Equity Rights Conference, at the LGBTQ Issues Conference, and I made sure that our chapter sponsored additional people to go to those conferences and paid for their way to go to those conferences so that they could go. We also brought in C. Scott Miller into our campus and did training on our campus with all of my teachers on my campus. And the district this last year during COVID actually went and did the unconscious bias training for the entire district, offered it out, to all the schools online. So I mean, that's a big part of the thing. I know I've constantly passing out safe space posters to those teachers that I know who've gone through those trainings and are empathetic and allies and part of our community, to put up in their classrooms, because our kids need to know. I'm not going out there evangelizing. I'm not going out there grooming kids. I'm not saying, hey, you should be gay. No, that's not my shtick. I'm not out there. That's not why I work with kids. That's not why I love the kids. I love the kids because they're our future generation. Um, and that's something, a fear out there in so much of the community, that gay LGBTQ educators are out there grooming these kids. We're not. Uh, but we want to make sure that those who are part of our community feel safe on their campuses and are getting the right pronouns used for them, and have the right documentation so the substitute comes in and doesn't start, is Johnny here? Is Johnny here? So we've worked hard at those things on our campuses and on our districts to make sure that this doesn't happen in a very conservative South Orange County. I mean, uh, I'd stack my conservative people up against anybody's conservative people in Leonard Island.
All right, Mel, do you want me to repeat the question? Do you remember? to repeat it.
Go ahead and repeat for me and our listeners who may need to hear it again too.
All right. It takes all of us a long time to figure ourselves out. As educators and identity role models, how do you support students' identity struggles or challenges?
I think one of the best ways, especially one of the best ways that LGBTQIA plus educators can do that is by sharing our own struggles. And that, life is a struggle, sometimes day to day. Not only so LGBTQIA plus students can have role models that I know that I did not have when I was a child or a young person, but also just so even cisgender straight young people can see that LGBTQIA plus people are part of their community. I think one of the most poignant moments for me, it kind of borders on my coming out story. I didn't share coming out at work, and I formally came out at work. I was teaching middle school PE at the time and came out when Prop 8 passed, because I saw LGBTQ students that definitely needed to see grown-ups in their lives, consistent grown-ups in their lives that were going through the same fears when Prop 8 passed. But again, also for cis straight students to know that, hey, your teachers are part of that group that was just harmed horribly, by our own government in California, by the voters in California who made this decision. And one of the most poignant conversations I had was a kid at the end of that class who just sat when everybody was excused to go to the locker room. He just sat and was ugly crying. An eighth grade boy, just ugly crying, not because he was LGBTQ, but because I had also had him for homeroom and for 3 years, and that he and I had developed, a very deep mentor-mentee relationship, and just, the parent away from home, and he was so worried about he was worried about my relationship with God because his father was a preacher, and based on what he had heard at church, that his favorite teacher was going to go to hell, and he was concerned about what was going to happen to me after I died, so much so that he was weeping openly in class. So pulling him aside and having a conversation with him about that, and being able to say, first of all, as a young person, you need to listen to your father, but you also have to be a student of the Bible as you get older and read those words for yourself. But also, don't worry about me. I have my relationship with God, and that relationship is between me and God, and neither you nor your dad have anything to say about that, kind of a thing. But just, I was literally the first LGBTQ person that this child had encountered openly. And yet, this is all he knew about gay people, is that we're all just going to hell. So being open and sharing our own struggles, I think, is the best that we can do. But also, like you said, Scott, recognizing that struggles are not always negative. That even things like, if I was dating at the time and had a picture of a girlfriend on my desk, kids could look over the locker room door and see it, and then they would notice when that picture wasn't there anymore. It's like, so coach, what happened? Did you break up? Did you move on? Like, just being able to share things like that, and it being okay. Or like, coach, notice you got a new picture on your desk. Hey, how's it going? Because those are conversations that students would also have with cisgender straight teachers as well, with pets, spouses, kids, family, and just sharing life struggles in general, and just being there, being out, being seen, being present, I think is the greatest gift that we can give our students.
Thank you, Robin.
One of the challenges my students have done as they enter my classroom each year is they go for a search on YouTube for our wedding at the Orange County Courthouse from years ago. It's like a Trojan hunt or a cookie hunt for them, you know.
Well, good. I once heard a joke mail that said gay people don't go to hell, they go to brunch. So we'll just leave it like that. We'll go to brunch instead. So we have another question. I've asked of our participants to put anything that they would like to ask in chat, and I don't see anything yet. So I have another question for you. What does intersectionality mean to you? And has your view on intersectionality helped you or hindered you in the workplace and in general society? That's a very heavy question. So if you do want to pass on this, you're certainly welcome to, but just think about all the different facets of your lives and has it helped, hurt as being LGBT? And let's start with David. Are you ready?
Yeah. What does intersectionality mean to me? You know, and again, and this is through CTA and workshops that I've gone to, you know, and intersectionality just means all the roles that society has for me, or that I fit into these roles. And to me, some of those roles, you know, there's some societal stressors that are associated with it. Being gay, being Mexican, depends where I'm at, you know, just different roles that I play. But I think understanding what intersectionality is and where I'm at in that spectrum um, has helped me just to at least look at things. But I'm overall a pretty positive person, so I try, I guess, just understanding itself. I really I try to educate as much as I can. I try to, when I'm feeling that way, you know, I guess, you know, I try to, I don't know, work against that. But, you know, the other thing when that makes me think about them is, you know, I call this like, it depends where I'm at in society. You know, if I'm in Mexico and Puerto Vallarta, you know, a lot of the societal stressors that some of my roles have aren't there. You know, I feel relaxed. You know, I get more of those here, you know, at work or at home. Um, and I think it's important to recognize, you know, especially talking to my female students, Mexican, you know, Latinas, uh, that might identify themselves as, you know, lesbian or, you know, questioning. I think it's important to understand that, you know, just reminding them that they're strong, that, you know, society's going to put, you know, some pressure on you, but just, you know, just remember you're an amazing person. I mean, that's how I see it, but I'm still learning about intersectionality.
Robin, would you like to take a stab at this?
Intersectionality. I grew up in the 70s, 60s, and 70s, and everything was taught that we were the great melting pot. What that meant that everybody had to conform to the white male standard. You know, so that's what you learn now. But you know, it's like you didn't. I didn't understand that, you know, as a child, you know, and being able to see that now as an adult, how you need to respect you know, other cultures and see the values of the other cultures. Um, it's so important now, and I love hearing the stories of my kids. You know, where are you from? Where are your parents from? You know, what's your practices at home, and what have you bringing into the classroom? One of our favorite activities at school used to be, we had a cultural fair day, and it was destroyed because we had a white male teacher who, you know, he disliked what we were doing, so he brought in uh, American Christmas, and he brought in a video that had every time you saw a Christmas symbol, had a football player come and tackle the person and break it out because it was violating what he was doing. It destroyed the day. It destroyed the sensitivity of the day. It destroyed the love of the day that was being shared. Uh, we still have such a long way to go on all of this. I'm not sure it'll happen in my lifetime. I hope so.
Let's hope. Mel.
Sure. Thank you, Scott. I mean, honestly, when the word intersection started to become mainstream, it was mostly a buzzword of identity politics. And my own personal view of intersectionality has changed. When I first understood it, it was like, hey, I'm queer and I'm non-binary, and hey, you're my friend and you're BIPOC. Let's figure out where we have struggles that are similar, and where we have similar struggles is where they intersect. And it was like, how can, basically, if you're straight, if you're gay, if you're BIPOC, but if you're BIPOC but straight, and where can we all find intersection in our own struggles? Being somebody who's female, with finding an intersection with somebody who's male but queer, where are struggles similar and where can they intersect? But more and more, it's kind of like, where does your own struggle intersect with your own struggle? Like, for instance, um at the intersection of blackness and transgender, there's so much beauty and culture, but yet the media only shows us death at the intersection of black and transgender. That's what we see the most often at that intersection. And unfortunately, with the deaths of so many of our transgender black powerful queens that are just no longer with us. But it's also, the flip side of that coin is, on the journey of racial justice, the intersection of power, privilege, and whiteness. And where do I see myself in that intersection? And how, when I get to that intersection of power, privilege, and whiteness, how do I use that intersection for good? And my place in that intersectionality, even though I'm queer and non-binary, I still have an intersection of power, privilege, and whiteness. There's also an intersection of age and queerness and a generational divide on so many issues, even about the word queer. At that intersection of age and queerness, there's an intersection of age and queerness. That intersection is different for a 12-year-old than it is for a 70-year-old at that point of intersection. So there's also the intersection of gender and sexuality. For me, that intersection has moved throughout my life, and that intersection is not in the same place as I've walked through life. So it continues to change, and I think the more that we examine other people's intersectionalities and what those intersections mean, and knowing that people have different intersections in life, I think that once we become more understanding of that, we can all kind of move forward together. But just recognizing other people's intersections, I think, is paramount. I mean, there's a huge divide within the LGBT community, between the intersection of whiteness and LGBTQ and the intersection of BIPOC and LGBTQ, even in our own community, that we need to take an inward look at and solve amongst ourselves. So, yeah, that's how I feel about that.
Thank you, and thank you for explaining the word queer, for how it means different also, because I meant to ask you that early on when you said it, because I know some people are like, I don't know what to do with that word. Andrea.
So I think that there's two different ways to look at intersectionality, one being the paradigm that Mel laid out, and a different way that I kind of flip to be on the positive side. I see intersectionality as kind of like one of those rad multi-layered cakes that you see advertised on the internet, and that we're full of all these different flavorful, wonderful, beautiful layers of who we are. I'm queer, I'm Chicana, I'm an educator, I'm married, I'm so many different things. And when it all comes together, it's this gorgeous, delicious, and beautiful cake, and that intersectionality represents all the different layers of beauty within each and every single one of us.
Thank you. We have about 8 minutes left, and we have a question from one of our participants. I'm not sure that all of you will have time to answer because I do have one final question for you. But just think about this. How has your identity impacted your experience in CTA and in your leadership roles? And whoever just wants to jump in, and then I'll have to cut you. So we're not going to cut you. I'm going to cut you off so that we can answer the final question.
Well, I'll just jump in then if we're jumping. I mean, it's mostly been positive. I think being an out non-binary person in a leadership role means that other members get to see that there's a non-binary person in a leadership role in CTA. You know, there sometimes it's negative. I mean, you know, especially around election season, tongues become sharp, and I've heard comments both behind my back and directly to my face that the only reason you got elected is because you're gay. And I'm like, well, I'd like to think that I have skills that back it up, but just this notion that the only reason that the electorate decided to put me in office is because I'm gay is actually quite off-putting. But again, just the way that you have to be visible to students, to me, it's important to be visible to rank and file members as well. That so many times, especially in education, if you go the administration route, if you become an administrator, so many times you're told to either go back in the closet, stay in the closet, or, you know, don't be gay at work if you reach a certain level. And at least in union leadership, that there's nothing like that. It's quite the opposite. It's please be you, which I do. I don't ever pretend to be anybody else, and I make no qualms about it. So so yeah, that's my story about that.
I know whenever I was looking at running for my local chapter, you know, there's looking at positions that were open. I was no way I was going to be a president or vice president because I didn't want to be the face of my union, you know. And I realized that's partly because of my background. The newspaper story says, oh, local, you know, and they put the label on first before they look at your qualifications and all that. You know, that's the reason why I became chapter treasurer instead. I said I could do the work and I don't have to be the face, you know.
All right, anyone? David or Andrea? Okay, no? All right, so I'm going to ask you the very last question. And I don't know that this is long or short. It's however you want to be your authentic self. What is the one thing you wish others would understand about your identity? Let me say it one more time.
There's nothing to understand about it. I am who I am, and that's all you need to know. There's no justification. There's no reason. I am me, and how much of me I share with you is up to me. And there's nothing else to say about it. I am who I am. I'm normal. Well, okay, normal is relative, all right, but but there's nothing medically wrong or psychologically wrong or off or whatever. I am me. And you can either handle me or you can't, but I'm not going to put myself in a box for you or anybody else. And I'm just going to walk through the world the way I walk through the world, period.
Treat me with respect and I'm going to treat you with respect. It's a two-way street. You know, how would you treat your friend, your sister, or any others like that? Treat me the same way and I'm going to treat you the same way. You know, we're a social society. We want to be friends.
One of them is funny, you know, I would love for my family to understand that because I identify as gay does not mean I know every single gay person in this planet. All right. But the other one is I wish I didn't have to. I have an identity. I wish it didn't matter. I wish it was like, hey, there's this wonderful human that exists, and they're right here in front of me. And like Mel said, I, it's me. It's why should you put a label on me? And again, it's just I wish we got to a point where we didn't have to identify anyone, but just treat everyone with love and respect for just exactly who they are.
And in my situation, I would ask folks to unpack and dismantle heteronormativity. That means a worldview that defaults to heterosexuality as the norm. That needs to be dismantled. We should never make assumptions that involve heteronormativity. Yeah, I'm happily married to someone who presents as a cisgender male, but that doesn't mean I'm any less queer. That doesn't mean I'm any less pan.
All right. Well, thank you all for panelists for giving up a lot of yourself today, which is always a scary thing. Coming out for our participants is never a one-size-fits-all story. It's not the same story. It's all very different for each and every one of us. And it's a journey, and it changes, and we take different directions, and we make choices along the way. So thank you for being brave and using this safe space to tell everyone else your story. And I hope that everyone has gotten their questions in the chat, which we had the one. And on behalf of REAC and SOJI, thank you for joining us for CTA's Takeover Tuesdays. Join us for another great afternoon with more dynamic presentations. I'm C. Scott Miller, and we will see you later. Have a good afternoon. Take care of one another and love each other. Happy Pride.